shitcoin.com show. The guys sit down with guests to chit chat about crypto. It's time for the shitcoin.com show. Let's all not get tracked.
Welcome to the shitcoin.com show, everyone. Today, as always, I'm sat here with Andreas Brecken.
Hello.
And the special guest today is Tieshun Roquerre, the Namebase CEO and founder. Am I correct in saying that, Tieshun?
CEO and co-founder. My other co-founder, Anthony Liu, is our CTO.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us today. It's definitely great to have you on. I know Handshake is getting quite a lot of, there's a lot of people talking about it right now. So it's definitely very, very current. And I think it's great to kind of deep dive into this with you.
Yeah, totally. It's been phenomenal to see how much community interest there's been. And it's not just because, handshakes went viral in Silicon Valley. It seems like people are interested in the protocol too.
Yeah, and you guys have some really good friends over at Purse.io and some other places. So definitely caught my attention.
So in terms of kind of taking this all the way back to the beginning, it would be great just to get an overview from you of, what the landscape of DNS is right now and just, how that looks.
Yeah, totally. So as like a brief, high level way to think about DNS, it's kind of like a phone book for the internet. So, it's a weird niche technology that most people don't think about, but literally every internet user uses. It stands for the domain name system. So when you type in a domain like facebook.com or google.com, you're using DNS. And what it does is it basically points a human readable name like google.com to a IP address that is like the address of a server. And basically when the internet first came out, this DNS didn't really exist, and people were like, wow, IP addresses are like hard to remember. So we need like a human readable way to do it. And that's why DNS was created is effectively like this phone book. The other key thing to understand when you're thinking about DNS is that it's hierarchical. So it starts at the root, which is basically, the .coms, .io, .net, .org. Those are all called top level domains, TLDs. And then it basically delegates down the tree. Each TLD can issue subdomains. Those are the second level domains like facebook.com, google.com, right? Namebase.io. These are all second level domains. And then you can obviously continue going down. You can have, subdomains and all that. Developers.google.com, sites like that. And that's basically DNS in a nutshell.
And there's and then there's all these country-specific ones for like each country. You got your .uk, which is usually .co.uk. And do you even know how many of these top-level domains there are?
Yeah, there's a lot, but also like not that many. There's 1,500 TLDs. The popular ones are like .com, .org, .net, .io. Most countries have their own country-level TLDs. So actually, like .ai, .io. Any two-letter TLD is actually like a country code TLD. And then, different organizations will own TLDs as well. So like VeriSign, they own .com. So they just kind of, anytime you're buying a .com domain, they just kind of get the money for that. And then there are, some new gTLDs is what they're called, which is like a generic top-level domain. And that was kind of the program that ICANN, which is the organization that's basically in charge of managing the TLD namespace and gets to determine, who gets what TLD. They basically would issue these new gTLDs, and that's what allows companies to go and register new ones. I think technically actually anyone can register it, but it's not really something that a normal person can do. There's a $200,000 application fee, and that's just like the application fee. So if you don't actually get the TLD, you just like lose that money. And there's this like auction process for the name itself. But like that's basically the namespace in a nutshell. It's like country level domains. You have like legacy ones like .com. There's some government usage ones as well, .gov, and then you have gTLDs, and there's about 1,500 of all these in total.
So somebody out there paid $200,000 to apply for like .pets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they paid even more for the name, right? Like some of these
Right.
TLDs they sell for millions of dollars,
Yeah.
which all goes to like ICANN, which is funnily enough is like a nonprofit. So it's kind of
Mhm.
weird that they've literally made like hundreds of millions of dollars off the GTLD program, like even just
Yeah.
off the application fees alone. But that's effectively what happens is like some company comes and buys. I think Google bought .dev, within the last few years, and they have those domains as well. And that's how it works.
Now, I remember, I can't uh, quite remember which year this was, but I do remember using something called Namecoin back in the day. So I think I had to buy Namecoin tokens, and it would allow me uh, to have sort of the domain name on the blockchain. And I tried to register some stuff on it, but it was very, very complicated. It was running a lot of commands in command line. Do you have any experience with Namecoin?
Yeah, totally. Namecoin is a great project. It was really kind of the pioneer in the space. DNS on blockchain is one of those like really clear, obvious use cases for a blockchain. DNS already is actually fairly decentralized to a certain extent, right? There's a lot of different people involved, but the issue is that at the root level, which is where it all stems from. It's not decentralized at all. It's actually centralized. And there's a few other aspects of the design that are basically poor for security and poor for many other reasons. And so putting DNS like on a blockchain to a certain extent is a phenomenal idea that's been attempted. So Namecoin was kind of the predecessor. And you point out a really good point there, which is like it was pretty complicated to use, but there's also a number of basically mechanism design decisions that were implemented that like weren't ideal for a naming system, and that basically Handshake kind of learned from its predecessor. Would it be helpful for me to go into some of those details now, or do you want to stick to more of like an overview and then I can kind of go into details?
Well, yeah. What year do you think Namecoin? What year was it
I
launched?
think it was 2011 when I checked it. Yeah, so it was pretty early days.
Yeah, and do you think Namecoin failed because people don't care, or because of the technical design, like you say?
I think it was a combination of multiple factors, but the technical design was a big aspect of it. So the thing with Namecoin that was challenging is one, like most other naming blockchain projects, they haven't actually tried to decentralize the top level domain naming system. They all try to create these basically like subdomains effectively, right? So that's why with Namecoin, I think it's like .bit or something like that, right? It has an extension for the name. ENS has like .eth. And Handshake basically is specifically trying to decentralize the top level domain namespace, and there are specific reasons for that. The reason why is because if you don't actually decentralize the TLD namespace, then the actual the governance, the centralization point, and the existing DNS is still stuck at the ICANN level. And there's the other aspect, which is that if you think about like the benefits of DNS on a blockchain, one of the strongest benefits is actually security. And this is not something that most people talk about a lot, but basically the way that security works on the internet today, which with HTTPS, is very flawed. What your computer does when it goes and trusts a website, and you get that little green lock mark, and then you're like know that you have a secure communication with the website. It's basically enforced through this system called a certificate authority, and basically that system is very insecure because your computer in the course of its like day-to-day browsing is basically trusting like thousands of certificate authorities, which can actually delegate authority to intermediates, and those intermediates can delegate authority to like even more intermediates. And that entire system is the basically the backbone for TLS, which is the what the HTTPS relies on. And Handshake is basically their main innovation is they're trying to decentralize that aspect and create a much more secure root of trust for internet security than the certificate authority-based system. It basically shifts the root of trust from the like centralized CAs to a distributed root of trust. And that's what it was aiming to do. So if you look at some of these previous attempts, like Namecoin, like they weren't really trying to do that as much. And then the other aspects of the mechanism design, which were difficult to help it succeed, is that you could register the names for a flat fee. And I actually think the cost like went down over time. So you register any name for a flat fee, and all the names were just like available. So anyone can just go and register them. And what ended up happening is that basically whales would just come on, or early adopters would come on and just get all the good names, right? Because you can just go and register them. And what that means is that, you know, people who came in a few years later or a year later or whatever, they wouldn't have, you know, great names to go and bid on. And the issue with that, that's not inherently bad in the long term, but you know, if you look at like a .com namespace today, right, it's like kind of hard to get like a great domain name because a lot of them have already been registered. But the issue is that if you have that end state happen before the namespace has become massively successful and like dominated the world to a certain extent, then there's no reason for newcomers to go and invest in that namespace and start using it and adopt it. So that's a huge issue that affected some of these earlier attempts, which is that like the early whales or you know, scalpers or whatever, they would just go and register all the good names, and they would basically dilute the namespace in a way that prevented adoption.
I think I remember that in Namecoin, even if I wanted to buy a domain on Namecoin that was already taken, one issue was how do I reach the person owning it to make an offer?
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, another aspect outside of the specific mechanism design is also basically the ecosystem was not really mature enough to support like mass adoption of a decentralized DNS protocol. You know, if you look at like Handshake today, so Handshake decentralizes DNS and it lets you, you know, as a quick overview, it lets anyone register a top level domain directly on the Handshake blockchain, and it's through this completely decentralized auction process. The names are registered. The names are rolled out automatically, and that is completely done on chain, and it's through an auction process. So the benefit of that is that you know, some names are worth a lot more than other names, right? So you don't really want them going out for a flat fee. For example, coin and crypto, the highest bids on those were 200,000 HNS and 500,000 HNS respectively, which was around like $50,000 to $100,000. Worth of HNS, right? So you like, you know, that name coming out for like just like a $10 flat fee, for example, right? That'd be like a really bad scenario because now it's like not coming out for a market price, and it just you know, basically just incentivizes people to try and go and squat all the names very, very quickly. So you have that aspect, but then if you think about the ecosystem, as you pointed out, right, like a lot of these protocols are really, really difficult to use early on, or they still are very difficult to use. You know, that's why for my co-founder and I, when we discovered Handshake, we basically grew super excited about it. And I can share more about that in a bit, but you know, we kind of saw the potential for Handshake to actually create this secure backbone for the entire internet, right? It can make these domain names censorship resistant. It can make them more secure. It can make them private. It can let people truly own the domain names versus right now you can actually only rent domain names, you know, from the companies that own the TLDs. And so there's all these benefits, but you know, if you think about like no mass adoption is going to happen if you have to go through like 20 steps to go and use these names. So that's why we wanted to build Namebase to make it really easy for anyone to just on-ramp to Handshake. So that's why we have an exchange for HNS as well as a domain registrar. And we also have basic functionality to go and manage your names and sell them and all that after you register the name. And so that on-ramp mechanism, you know, that never really matured for these other namespaces, whereas with Handshake, you know, that was available on day one. There's also wallets for Handshake, and there's block explorers and all that. So it basically kind of launched with like a really rich ecosystem, which could allow it to get adoption. And that's another key aspect for Handshake's you know, excitement as compared to some of these previous attempts.
Cool. Very cool. So in terms of, yeah, how Namebase fits into the Handshake ecosystem then. So essentially you're using the protocol but providing services and providing kind of the framework, how it can be used, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Our mission is really just to enable mass adoption for Handshake. So we didn't create the Handshake protocol. You know, we found out about it after the initial testnet was announced. And my co-founder and I, we actually weren't like super into crypto beforehand, but we were both engineers. Yeah, it's kind of like a surprising thing.
Wow.
You know, my personal story is that you know, I grew up in the U.S. and so in the U.S. we don't really have that many issues with censorship, at least yet. And so it's kind of hard to get a sense of like why this stuff is important. But I was fortunate enough in one of my first years at uni to go and travel to Turkey, where I got to see websites that were actually censored. You know, I was just trying to use like Wikipedia or like YouTube at the time, and I couldn't access it. And that was shocking to me to realize that all these people didn't have access to this, you know, internet that basically I grew up on and built a career on. You know, all these benefits of having this free flow of information just was not present, and that really stuck with me. But at the time, you know, I didn't really think that there was anything that I could do to help the situation. Right? It's like as an individual, what can you do in this case? So I didn't do anything about it. But you know, when Anthony and I, when we discovered Handshake, it was kind of this light bulb moment where we saw, oh shit, like this can actually create a better internet system for the entire world. It'd be very, very difficult to prevent access to the domain name system that Handshake is creating. And that's something that just is like a true good for the world that would just make it better, in my opinion. And so when we found that, we wanted to build something that would help enable adoption, which is why we set out to build Namebase.
And in terms of kind of how you see this panning out, because I know there's some interesting points in terms of how, you know, you've made sure that, you know, ICANN and existing registrars are kind of, you know, taken into the equation too. How can you just explain how that works as well? Because I know that you've kind of, is it in terms of Alexa rank, in terms of how you've made sure existing websites are kind of covered and domains, or yeah, I just love to understand that a little bit more too.
Yeah, totally. And I need to be clear here that it wasn't us that did this. Like these were the mechanisms that were designed into the protocol that we didn't, you know, come up with. So any of the credit for that should just go to the initial, you know, Handshake contributors. You can go onto the GitHub and see, you know, a lot of people who wrote the code there. You know, what we saw is what we think is really important here is basically Handshake has multiple mechanisms that make it difficult for whales and early adopters to just go and register all the good names, right? They want to kind of mitigate squatting. You can't completely prevent it, but you can mitigate it. And so there's a few mechanisms involved there. The names are rolled out over the course of 52 weeks. So you can bid on any name imaginable, but basically there's like a function that gives you a week number for each name that determines when is the earliest that you can start bidding on a name. And what that does is it prevents people who come on day one from getting all of the good names and just ruining the namespace. So there's that mechanism. The second mechanism is that the names are issued out through an auction system that runs completely on chain. You know, that's really important because the market value for the names, just having a base price is like not going to be sufficient, because some of the names are worth, you know, literally tens of thousands of dollars more than others, as the market has proven. So that mechanism is really important. And then finally, you also want to make sure that the namespace can get adoption in the long term, right? Past this initial set of early adopters, how do you protect the system and make sure that people actually can come, you know, the mainstream can come and switch over? So to do that, the first thing that Handshake did is that all the existing TLDs, all those 1,500 TLDs are blacklisted. So only those TLD owners can go and use those, basically like claim those names on Handshake, right? So only like VeriSign can claim .com, you know, only the Indian Ocean can claim .io. And until then, it's basically it just resolves. You know, if you're using Handshake DNS, all your normal .coms and .ios and all that, they just resolve. It's backwards compatible. And then on top of that, they also want to make sure that like brands and these like early, you know, technology companies and whatnot, they would be able to go and switch over. So you don't want some random person being able to register .google, because that would mean that google.com would never like switch over. And so there's this mechanism that they created where the top 100,000 Alexa domain names are pre-reserved as TLDs on Handshake. And it's a completely decentralized process, but basically like only google.com can register .google, only Facebook can register .facebook, etc. And that just makes it so that, you know, when Handshake is big enough that these companies are now like, oh shoot, like at the very least, like we need to get our names so that, you know, our brand is protected or whatnot. People can just go and they can still go and do that.
I wasn't aware actually that it was being rolled out just over 52 weeks. So essentially, will the auctions stop after that point, or will more be added after that?
Yeah, so the way it works is that it basically is rolled out to for the auctions to start at any point after those 52 weeks. So, you know, on week 1, you can only register like 1 over 52 of, you can only bid on 1 over 52 of all the names that you can think of. You know, 6 months in, half of the namespace is available for bidding. And then after a year, all of the namespace is available for bidding. So it's basically just like an on-ramp period for the first year, so that as people come in and learn about Handshake, someone who comes in and learns 9 months from now about Handshake, they can still go and bid on a lot of the really good names. And then after that first year, you can just bid on any name that you can think of, because it'll all be available for bidding.
And for people who want to be early adopters of this, like say I own shitcoin.com and I want, I guess, an alternative name that resolves using Handshake. What would that look like?
Yeah, totally. So there's multiple ways to do it. At a high level, basically the steps are get Handshake coin and then go and bid on your Handshake name. And you can do that through through the CLI if you wanted to. You can do that through a desktop wallet. You can also do it through Namebase. So that's why we wanted to create Namebase in the first place, because if you looked at like some of the other, I think at the time like CryptoKitties was really popular, and it was super lauded for their really good design. But if you go onto it at the time, it was like, oh, you want to use CryptoKitties? Like here's like the 10 steps that you need to complete to go and get a CryptoKitty. Yeah. And for Handshake, you really want like even like normal developers to be able to use it for their side projects, right? Developers like playing around with new toys, and so like this is something that you would want developers to use, because the developers are also the influencers within technology. And so there's a great article by Chris Dixon actually about this, which is basically like talking about how what developers use on their weekends or like tinker with ends up becoming the technologies that the mainstream uses every day, 10 years later. And so you really want to enable that. And developers are not going to go through like 10 steps to go and use this, like new marginal internet system. So with Namebase, what we did is we created this on-ramp so that you can go in with your USD or with your BTC, you can go and buy HNS, and then you can go and immediately use that HNS to go and register the names. And then there's some complexities around the auction process that are kind of annoying to deal with. And our system just abstracts all of that away. For example, like if you don't submit like a certain transaction within a certain period, you can like lose your money if you just like don't do that. So like our system does that automatically for you. So you're just like, type in your name, point and click, and then you're done. And then you can go and manage the DNS settings through our interface as well. Of course, if someone wants to like withdraw their name and do that, they can do that as well. But basically that's probably the easiest way to get started. But you can always use the CLI or the desktop wallets too.
And so what do you think would be a good name for shitcoin.com on Handshake until VeriSign just ports over.com?
Yeah, so to be clear, when people are using Handshake for their DNS, shitcoin.com will still work. So you can go and type in shitcoin.com and it'll resolve correctly. So that's totally a thing that you can do. I don't know if I should be saying this publicly on your podcast so that everyone can listen, but you can register shitcoin on Handshake. So I just typed in I just searched it up, namebase.io/domains/shitcoin, just to kind of see when it's available. So it's available in 242 days. So you can register shitcoin and you can use that as a TLD. So you can have, website.shitcoin if you want to use it like as like a TLD itself. You can also use it as a domain. So you can type in shitcoin/ into your browser, and that'll resolve to shitcoin.com if you point it to that.
Oh man, I'll have to put it on my calendar to start a bidding war for the shitcoin TLD in 242
days.
Yeah. I mean, if you add it to your watch list, that's another feature that we made. So you can add it to your watch list, and you'll just get an email as soon as it's available for bidding. So you can just go and initiate that process.
Very cool. Very cool. I know as well. So we actually kind of part of the SideShift.ai ecosystem too. And I know I was looking at SideShift also. And that was, the same thing. I think it was around the same time, 242 or 240 days. So I think we're going to have to create some buzz and some bidding wars around that time.
Yeah. The thing I'm not looking forward to is, and this is how we didn't create Handshake, is because the Namebase, it wasn't like pre-registered for Namebase. So anyone can go and register Namebase, and that is in 305 days. So it's like even worse than shitcoin and SideShift. So that's going to be an unfortunate auction to go through.
Oh, for sure.
I was thinking about the adoption for Handshake in general. I mean, when you type in a website and say you're using Chrome, to make this work with Handshake, would you have a plugin into Chrome? Would you change the way DNS works in Chrome or on the computer? Like, how does a web browser or some other app become Handshake aware?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. So there's a few different aspects to this. The first is that you can have browsers like natively integrated. So I think Brave has publicly stated that they're evaluating Handshake, and we talk with Brendan all the time. They're actually claiming their name on Handshake. So Brave.com is claiming .brave. So that'll be a cool thing. But actually the initial adoption is going to be more grassroots. So the easiest way to start resolving a Handshake name is you just use a Handshake compatible DNS resolver. DNS resolvers are not things that people normally think about, but it's actually something that like literally tens of millions of people around the world go and use. The main popular ones are Cloudflare's 1.1 and Google's 8.8. These are DNS resolvers that are really popular, like in the Middle East and other countries, Southeast Asia, India, all that. And they are basically just like faster, like privacy-focused resolvers. And effectively what you want to do with Handshake is just use a resolver like that. And the cool thing is there's already a really good resolver that's supporting Handshake. It should be up like later this week, actually. It's called nextdns.io. It's a privacy-focused DNS resolver that is created by the Daily Motion founders, which is kind of cool.
Cool.
And if you just basically just use that resolver, like you not only get like a more privacy-focused resolver that's like way better than your internet service provider's resolver, which is like you're definitely spying on your traffic, and oftentimes they like kind of monetize your browsing traffic. So it's like not only like a better resolver in general, but it also supports Handshake, which is really cool. So like all you have to do is on your system, like on your computer or on your network router, you just go and point your DNS to that Handshake compatible resolver. It takes literally like less than 30 seconds, and then you're done. All your normal websites will work as you would expect, and then you just also get access to the Handshake websites as well. So it's like purely additive.
Yeah, I was discussing going over a little bit with Blake yesterday how DNS works, and I said sometimes you can make your internet at least seem a lot faster if you change the DNS on the computer to something like the Cloudflare 1.1.1.1 or the Google one. But then came the question of how much are these people spying on us?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like
a lot.
Like Google, Google, like their entire business model is advertising, right? So it's like using them for, even though they literally have like hundreds of millions of people who've like switched over to using Google DNS because it's like fast. But they're like that. I wouldn't trust that company with the data. Cloudflare is like they have a better brand, but honestly, like they don't necessarily have the best practices either. It's also like not ideal that so much of the world is just centralizing their DNS requests to one company, which can get requests for cease and desist or like whatever. And actually, that's a really interesting thing to consider, which is that a lot of times the ways that these DNS resolvers get adoption in countries is because the countries implement some form of censorship, and you can actually use these resolvers to temporarily get around the censorship. So like when Turkey was censoring twitter.com, people were spray painting 1.1.1.1.1.
I saw that one. I saw that.
Yeah. It's crazy. So like they spray paint that on the walls because you can like get around the censorship. The issue is, these companies, they can't really talk about that use case that much, even though it's like one of the primary use cases. And they also can't really do it that well because like in India, for example, a lot of websites are actually censored, even if you're using Cloudflare DNS, because it's just like a centralized company. It's literally one IP address. So you can just like block that one IP address. Whereas with Handshake, you can actually use any DNS resolver. And actually the cool thing is Handshake has a light client. There's like a tiny piece of software that takes 10 megabytes of memory to run virtually 0 CPU, and it can trustlessly resolve the Handshake names. So it's like a resolver that you can run yourself, and it's fully decentralized, and it can't be shut down. And so the cool thing is Handshake can plug into the existing needs of these people who are using these alternatives right now to get around the censorship, and just fit directly into that use case, and then just provide access to a freer internet. So in terms of the other ecosystem developments, as I mentioned, nextdns.io, they're going to be supporting Handshake as a resolver. The other really cool thing is Zeit.co, which is, you probably haven't heard of it unless you're like a web developer, but it's a very popular. Oh, you have?
Yeah, now.sh or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they created Now. They also created Next.js, which is like a wildly popular JavaScript framework that's used by like Tencent and Hulu and Netflix and all that. And they're actually going to support Handshake deployments. So it's super cool because now.sh is like, the best of grade deployment solution for web developers, and they're going to directly support Handshake deployments, which mean anyone who tries to create a Handshake website will literally have like one of the best of breed deployment solutions for them. So then between Next.dns, which makes it really easy to resolve the names, and between Zeit, which makes it really easy to go and deploy a website on Handshake, and then obviously with Namebase you have the on-ramp to go and register the names. I'm really excited for those things to develop, because now that those initial primitives for that ecosystem are all there for the adoption to really start happening.
And in terms of where you see this going next, I mean, what does the roadmap look like for Namebase? I know you've been doing a ton of work to kind of get to this point, but yeah, what's coming in the next few months?
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Already
totally.
there's so much stuff you guys have done. I mean, you have a limit order book for HNS BTC, and then there's a wallet that includes the auction system.
Yeah,
You guys have
there's a lot going on there.
how many hundreds of developers work at Namebase today?
Yeah, we have less than 10 employees. So when we look back at it, it is a lot, but it's really just like these, and we actually need a lot more to make it even easier to use. But these are really just like the primitives that we kind of realized we need to go and build out to go and make Handshake as easy to use as possible. The next things that are on our roadmap, I'll talk about our roadmap, but also just in general, like the Handshake ecosystem developments, which is not limited to Namebase itself, because that's obviously the most important thing. So what you can do on Namebase right now is we have the Pro Exchange, which is important because you need that. The limit order book is important because you want people to be able to do price discovery. So without that, you would not have the price discovery, and that can also provide liquidity to other people who are trying to build interfaces and whatnot. And then you have the on-ramp, so you can buy HNS with USD, you can buy it with BTC as well, and then you can go and use those coins to go and register the names and manage names and the domain name settings and whatnot. The next thing that we're launching is this is kind of getting into the weeds, but normally when you go and buy a domain name on like GoDaddy or Namecheap, you go in and you can like edit the records. You can add like A records, you can add C name records and all that. But those are actually on subdomains. They're not on the top level domains. TLDs themselves you can't actually store records directly on them. They're referral only. So basically the TLDs refer to this piece of software called a name server, which basically is like showing what records are associated with a name. And right now with Handshake, basically Handshake TLDs, they work the same way. So they're referral only because it needs to maintain backwards compatibility with the existing DNS. So to actually go and point your name to a website, you can add a text record on chain to your name, which actually opens up a lot of really interesting possibilities, right? You can like hook it up to like IPFS or Siacoin or something like that, and then have a really fully decentralized web browsing experience. And that can be a complete other podcast just on its own. But then the normal way would be you'd have to set up a name server to go and use these names. And that's like an esoteric piece of software that like even developers don't even run that themselves usually, right?
Oh man,
So it's
like Dig.
software. Yeah, so what we do is we're deploying name servers automatically for people so that they can just go and really really easily just use their name, just like you would expect to use a normal domain name. And then past that, we're also launching a secondary marketplace for these names so that not only can people just go and bid on the names directly through Namebase and get the names through the auction process, but they can then go and sell those names to anyone else who's interested. I think you pointed out recently or earlier in the podcast, right? It was like, how do I buy a name from someone who already has it on Namecoin? And so we wanted to make sure that there's that market primitive in place so that the names can continue flowing and that there's not only liquidity for the coins, but liquidity for the names, which is really important.
And if you can have arbitrary records on your domain names, then could I so I could have my own name, like for me personally, and I could maybe add like my PGP key as a record?
Yeah, you totally could.
That would be very interesting for something like a messaging app, because you would only need to know the name of the person you're going to talk to, like their username, and they can look up the encryption keys and like maybe what their
Yeah,
website is, the kind of stuff.
Exactly. And that actually touches on why Handshake can provide a more secure root of trust for HTTPS than the existing system. Because basically the existing system, when you're like trying to find someone's key, you know, the website's key, it delegates that lookup to a certificate authority, which is like a third party that can be compromised. And they do get compromised. Handshake, you can just pin whatever key that you need to secure your communication directly with your name on the blockchain. And so now anyone can look that up and anyone can verify it. And so you just completely eschew that third party, and you're able to directly verify that that key is correct. And so that's actually how the HTTPS security can be improved through Handshake. And as you point out, there are probably near infinite use cases. Very, very easy to come up with a few good ones to just go and use that primitive to build other applications on top of as well.
Awesome. And in terms of, to keep up to date with you, Tieshun, and also where do we learn more about the Namebase ecosystem?
Yeah, totally. So in terms of new like product updates, actually, if you just sign up for namebase.io, we actually have a notification section for when new developments happen. But outside of that, our Twitter is probably the best place, Namebase HQ on Twitter. We also have a Discord, which is like very thriving. That's probably the best resource right now, honestly, to learn about Handshake. The community members there are super helpful. And, we've been meaning to create all this content for Handshake and whatnot, but the community members, they just do it a lot better than us. And they're able to help a lot more than we can, because a lot of the information is pretty spread out. There's also a Handshake Telegram, which is pretty popular. I think there's like 2,000 members there now. That is a good spot to get like general updates, although it's kind of hard to have really nuanced, like productive conversation there, just because, Telegram groups kind of become like a shit show over time.
And there is, and I believe there's some more technical Telegram group as well.
Yeah. There's also if you go into the Telegram, just check the pinned message, and you can see there's links to technical Telegrams. There's also like a Russian Telegram that someone started, and some other language ones. So obviously funnel into those too.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for this breakdown. I think it's been super educational for me, and I'm sure Andreas has learned some stuff too. And for everyone listening to this, I suggest you get over to Namebase and start Namebase.io and start checking out some names over there, get involved in some auctions and see where it goes. But it's definitely exciting times, and very excited to see how this all plays out. And
get ready to change your DNS server.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for you and your family members and your friends.